The official record states that on August 14, 1947, the fishing vessel Mary Catherine disappeared approximately 8 nautical miles off the coast of Andros Island in the Bahamas. The boat was reported missing by the harbor master at Morgan's Bluff when it failed to return by nightfall. A search was conducted over the following 3 days, yielding only scattered debris, a single life preserver with tooth marks that marine biologists could not identify, and one survivor, a boy, 10 years old. His name was Thomas Wardell, and he was found clinging to a piece of driftwood 17 miles from where the Mary Catherine was last seen, his eyes wide and unblinking, his lips crusted with salt and blood. The boy would not speak for 3 days. When he finally did, the words that came from his mouth were so disturbing, so utterly inconsistent with any known maritime disaster, that the Royal Bahamas Police Force made a decision that would echo through decades of suppressed documentation. They took his testimony once. They wrote it down in a leather-bound ledger that still exists in a basement archive in Nassau, and then they told him never to speak of it again. The transcript begins with standard identifying information. Thomas Wardell, son of Captain Jonathan Wardell and deckhand Mary Parrish, both presumed dead. The boy had been brought aboard the Mary Catherine that morning because his mother had no one to watch him, and his father believed a day on the water would teach him the trade. It was meant to be a routine run, pulling conch and grouper from the shallows near the blue holes, those vertical caves that plunge into the ocean floor like wounds in the skin of the earth. The crew consisted of 5 adults and the boy. By nightfall, only the boy remained. The interviewing officer, Constable Raymond Hicks, noted in the margin of the transcript that the child's voice never wavered during the account, never broke into tears, never showed the emotional distress one would expect from a traumatized survivor. Instead, Thomas spoke in a flat, mechanical tone, as if he were reading from a script written in a language he didn't fully understand. The officer wrote one word in the margin, underlined twice: dissociation. Thomas told them they had anchored near the edge of the largest blue hole in the region, a place the local fishermen called the Devil's Iris because of the way the water turned from turquoise to black in a perfect circle, like the pupil of some vast submerged eye. His father had always avoided it, but on that particular morning the fish were scarce everywhere else, and desperation made men reckless. They dropped anchor at 10:30, and within an hour the nets were full. Thomas remembered the men laughing, his mother smiling as she gutted grouper on the deck, the sun high and merciless, the water flat as glass. Then the anchor line went taut. Not gradually, not with the slow pull of current, but all at once, as if something below had seized it with purpose. His father went to check the winch, thinking it had snagged on coral, but when he tried to release the tension, the line wouldn't budge. It was locked. Worse, it was vibrating, a low hum that traveled up the rope and into the deck, into the bones of the boat, into their teeth. One of the crew, a man named Samuel, suggested cutting the line, but before Captain Wardell could respond, the boat lurched. Not forward, not side to side, but down. The stern dipped beneath the waterline, and seawater rushed over the transom in a frothing torrent. The men shouted, scrambled, tried to redistribute the weight, but the boat continued to sink, stern first, as if something below was pulling it with the patience of a predator that knows its prey cannot escape. Thomas said his mother grabbed him, wrapped her arms around his chest, and held him as the water climbed their legs, their waists, their chests. She was screaming, but he couldn't hear her over the roar of the ocean pouring into the boat. Then through the chaos and the spray and the terror, he saw it, rising from the blue hole, a shape so large it defied comprehension, so alien that his 10-year-old mind could only describe it in fragments, in pieces that didn't fit together into anything that should exist. He called it the Lusca because that's what the old fishermen called the thing that lived in the holes, the creature that pulled boats down and left no survivors. But Thomas's description went far beyond folklore. He spoke of tentacles, yes, but not like those of an octopus. These were thicker, ridged with bone-like protrusions, lined with suckers the size of dinner plates, each one ringed with teeth that clicked and rotated like the gears of some organic machine. He said there were 8 of them, maybe more. It was impossible to count because they moved independently, each one questing through the water with its own terrible intelligence. The body, what little he could see before the boat went under, was a mass of mottled flesh, grey and purple and black, slick with mucus that glowed faintly in the sun like oil on water. And the eyes. He said the eyes were the worst, not because they were monstrous, but because they were aware. They looked at him, they saw him, and in that gaze, he understood with the clarity that only children possess that this thing was not mindless. It was choosing. The boat capsized. Thomas was torn from his mother's arms by the rush of water, dragged down into the blue, tumbling, lungs burning, the world reduced to pressure and cold, and the distant sound of screaming cut short. He said he saw his father in the water, suspended in the shaft of sunlight that penetrated the surface, and he saw one of the tentacles wrap around his father's torso, saw the suckers latch onto his skin, saw his father's eyes go wide, not with pain, but with shock, as if he couldn't believe what was happening to him. Then the tentacle contracted, and his father's body folded in ways bodies shouldn't fold, and the water turned red. Thomas kicked toward the surface, breached, gasped, and saw the rest of the crew being pulled under, one by one, with the methodical efficiency of something that had done this many times before. His mother surfaced once, 20 feet away, her mouth open in a silent scream, and then a tentacle erupted from the water beneath her and dragged her down so fast she didn't even have time to take a breath. And here, in the cold fluorescent light of that police station, with the boy's words written in careful longhand on yellowing paper, "I want you to consider something." The authorities buried this testimony. They marked it classified. They told the family the crew had drowned in a sudden squall, despite the fact that the weather that day was clear, the sea was calm, and no other vessels in the area reported any disturbances. Why? What compelled them to silence a child's account, to scrub it from the official record, to let a myth swallow the truth? If you have theories, if you've heard stories from your own coastlines, from your own elders who speak in hushed tones about things that swim in the deep places, I want to hear them. Leave your thoughts below, because this isn't just history, this is pattern, and the ocean keeps its secrets until it doesn't. Thomas said he clung to a piece of the hull and drifted. He drifted for hours, maybe days. He couldn't be sure because time stopped meaning anything after the sun set and the stars came out and the water around him began to glow. Bioluminescence, he called it, though he didn't know that word then. He just knew that the sea was full of light, pulsing and shifting, and that beneath the light, shapes moved. Large shapes, slow and deliberate, circling. He said he could feel the Lusca's presence even when he couldn't see it, a pressure in the water, a displacement, a wrongness that made his skin crawl and his breath come in shallow gasps. It never touched him. It could have. It had killed 5 adults with ease, but it let the boy live. This detail, more than any other, disturbed Constable Hicks. He wrote in the margin, underlined 3 times, "Why spare the child?" The boy had no answer. Or perhaps he did, and he was too afraid to say it aloud. He told the constable that on the second night, as he lay on his back staring at the stars and waiting to die, he felt something brush against his leg. Not a tentacle, not a fin, but something smooth and warm, almost gentle. It circled him once, twice, and then disappeared into the deep. And in that moment, Delirious from dehydration and exposure and grief, Thomas understood. The Lusca had let him live because it wanted him to tell the story. It wanted someone to remember. It wanted proof, etched into the ledger of human record, that it existed, that it ruled the blue holes, that the ocean was not ours and never had been. The creature was not a mindless beast. It was a keeper of thresholds, a guardian of boundaries, and every now and then it sent a message to the surface. The message was simple: stay away. Thomas Wardell was found on the morning of August 17th by a passing cargo ship. He was unconscious, sunburned, barely alive. The crew wrapped him in blankets and radioed ahead, and by the time they docked in Nassau, the police were waiting. He spent a week in the hospital, silent, staring at the ceiling, his mother's screams looping endlessly in his mind. When Constable Hicks finally came to take his statement, the boy spoke for 40 minutes without stopping, without hesitation, as if he had been rehearsing the words since the moment the boat went down. The constable wrote it all down, every detail, every impossible, horrifying detail. And then he closed the ledger, locked it in a drawer, and told the boy that he needed to forget. For his own safety, for the safety of everyone. The official cause of the Mary Catherine's sinking was listed as structural failure and capsizing due to sudden weather. The bodies were never recovered. Thomas Wardell lived to be 73 years old. He never returned to the ocean. He never spoke publicly about what happened on August 14th, 1947. But before he died, he wrote a letter to a marine biologist at the University of Miami, a woman who had spent her career studying cephalopods and deep-sea gigantism. In the letter, he asked her a single question. If an octopus can learn, can remember, can recognize individual humans, what stops it from evolving into something more? What stops it from becoming something that hunts with intention, that kills with purpose, that chooses its survivors? The biologist never responded. Perhaps she thought it was the rambling of a senile old man, or perhaps she knew better than to answer questions that had no safe conclusions. The ledger still exists. It sits in a filing cabinet in the basement of the old police headquarters in Nassau, in a section marked Unresolved Maritime Incidents, surrounded by other reports of boats that vanished near the blue holes, other testimonies that were taken and then quietly erased. There are patterns in those reports. Patterns that suggest Thomas Wardell was not the first survivor, and certainly not the last. Patterns that suggest the Lusca, or something like it, has been pulling boats into the deep for decades, maybe longer, and that the authorities have known about it the entire time. But knowledge requires action, and action requires acknowledgement, and acknowledgement means admitting that there are things in the ocean we cannot control, cannot kill, cannot understand. So the reports gather dust. The stories are dismissed as folklore, and the blue holes remain open, inviting, beautiful from above. If you're still listening, if you follow this account to its end, then you carry a responsibility now. You know what lives beneath the surface. You know what the authorities chose to bury. And if you value that knowledge, if you believe that these stories need to be kept alive, then press the like button on this video. Subscribe to this channel, not for entertainment, but for preservation. Because the ocean doesn't forget. The creatures that dwell in its deepest places don't forget. And the more we ignore them, the bolder they become. The blue holes are still there. The Lusca is still there. And the next time a boat disappears off the coast of Andros Island, the only question that will matter is whether anyone will listen to the survivor. If there is one. Thomas Wardell's letter ended with a single line, written in shaking handwriting. It let me live so I could tell you, don't go near the holes. The biologist filed the letter away. The ocean kept its secrets. And somewhere in the crushing dark of the blue holes, something waits. Patient, intelligent, hungry. And it remembers every boat, every crew, every child who floated away on a piece of wreckage, carrying the story in their bones. The Mary Catherine was not the first. It will not be the last. And when the next boat sinks, when the next crew vanishes, the authorities will write the same lies they always have. But you'll know better. You'll know the truth. The Lusca is real, and it's still down there, waiting,